Hi guys. So, let me back you up just a tiny bit. Alright. So, I'm outside finally. There's not rain, but I didn't have time to set up an altar. So that part, fingers crossed, I will do tomorrow. But since we could be outside, and I guess I could have done this part inside, but we're going to talk about Mabon finally, which is Saturday. And some of the things that Mabon means, what is the Sabbat about, and then hopefully we'll get into, what can you do for Mabon? How do you want to celebrate Mabon? There's lots of different ways to do that, so we'll hopefully get into that. This is nice. Okay, so first of all, Sabbat is the second harvest festival, or the main harvest festival of the whole year. Okay, so the first one we celebrated at Lammas or Lunasa, and this is Mabon is the second one. It's the Autumn Equinox, which means day and night are equal all around the world. Doesn't matter if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're celebrating Ostera, which is the vernal equinox, but day and night are equal all the way around the world. So it's a good thing to remember balance. I have a special candle that I have a yin and yang that is on the candle that I always put on my altar to remind me of the balance. But it's really, the biggest thing is it's the second harvest festival. It's the main harvest festival of the year. It's where we really are harvesting as much as we possibly can, and preparing for the dark half of the year, preparing for winter, storing up stuff for winter, trying to figure out how it is that we can survive for the winter. Okay, a lot of sects of paganism talk about the god is dying at this time of the year, and it's a very symbolic death, which is, it's just, I love in paganism how we celebrate the wheel of the year and we bring it back to the cycle of life, the cycle of our lives, and equate it to the cycle of the earth. So this part of it to me is really interesting. So we'll go into that a little bit more. The fields are harvested. Really, am I gonna get mosquitoes? I was so excited to be outside because I thought maybe it's a little too cold for the mosquitoes. I need to light my candles. If I was smart, I would go get my candle and light my candle. Stop it. As the fields are harvested, you take everything out that you can to harvest for the dark half of the year, and you plow under. So the god is buried. The return of his grain body to the earth nourishes all that soil and prepares it. All winter, that stuff that was left over is feeding and nourishing the field underneath the snow, if you have snow, and helping to make it fertile for the planting of the spring. And then the bread and ale that we make from the grains that we harvested are to help us keep us and our animals alive through the fallow winter, through the dark half of the year. His body is thus usefully disposed of. His spirit returns, as do ours, to the mother in the spring, into her womb, through whom his solar aspect will be reborn at Yule. So finally we're going darker, darker, darker. So this is the equal balance of light and dark. And from Saturday on, it begins to get darker and darker and darker towards the darkest night of the year, which is Yule. And then at Yule, the god is reborn, and gradually it starts to get a little bit lighter from there until we make it to the lightest half of the year. Thus at Mabon, so I'm going to read a little bit. I have to say, this book I highly, highly, highly recommend. So this is Celebrating the Seasons of Life. This is Beltane to Mabon. So this is about the summertime holidays all the way until Mabon. Then the next book is from Samhain all the way until Ostara. And I actually have the next, I'm so impressed with this book. I have the next one on its way, so because I don't want to miss it. This book is awesome. I'm really loving it. It talks a lot about the myths and the lore of each Sabbat. It talks about symbols. It gives you activities. It gives you rituals. I'm really, really loving it. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from it because it's very spiritual. Thus at Mabon, we don't so much mourn his death, the God's death, as we acknowledge his death, and ours too, as a step towards rebirth, which we celebrate. It's sad to see the forms change. Amber waves of grain are movingly beautiful, as all healthy fields and meadows are, but change is growth, and growth is life. At Mabon, we can understand death as growth, as a part of the process of life, and so our cries of grief become shouts of celebration. So we know as those fields are plowed over, and all winter long it is giving back nutrients into the soil to make it fertile, so that when the time comes, stuff can begin to grow again. As grain falls to the scythe, so it rises again in the oven as it becomes bread. The oven is another aspect of the grave, the womb, and the bread and ale of harvest are other aspects of the God, more forms in which we recognize and honor him. So we are harvesting this grain, we are making it into ale and bread, and we are honoring the God by living off of this all winter long during the dark half of the year. When I say that the process of the God's death is finished at Mabon, I don't really mean to say that it's final. That is, although the stalks, fruits, and vines in which the God has lived are finally cut in the harvest, and while those individual manifestations of the God will live no more in that form, no death is ever final. This is because death is only a stage in the process, and the harvest is only a stage within a stage. Something else we acknowledge at Mabon is that this death of the ripe, outward forms of life that constitute our harvest begins a transformative stage in the cycle of life. It's not just that the fields begin their transformation from exhaustion to freshness as the spent stalk and leaves that have grown there release their nutrients back into the soil. It's not just that the harvested grains, fruits, and other crops are prepared to feed us and our beasties through the coming winter. Beyond these physical expressions of the process, the God's Spirit returns to the wholeness that is the goddess and is reconstituted in the elements of the mother. By Samhain, he's taken a new form, a non-physical form, and awaits his first rebirth at Yule. I love it. I love it. So that is incredibly, when I was a Christian, it's funny, I was talking to someone not too long ago about how sometimes it's hard as a pagan to really grasp things, because as a Christian, our stories are so ingrained in us that it's easy to picture, even though when you step outside of it, it's kind of like the same story. It is the same death and rebirth that the earth goes through, that we go through. It's just linked to something that men wanted us to, it like has a key. Their key is you have to give your life to Jesus, or you have whatever that key is. their key is you can only have this if you're the right kind of person, or if you do the right thing, or if you say the right words. I cannot believe my freaking neighbor is going to mow now. So when I find this element, this string of truth through every religion, it makes it a little more satisfying to me. It's because sometimes coming from Christianity to paganism, you kind of miss some of the traditions. I know for a long time I like midnight mass at Christmas time. I always am like, kind of liked midnight mass. It was very traditional and that kind of thing, but it was something that you looked forward to every year. Well, a lot of times in paganism, we have the same traditions. It's just we don't know how to follow them necessarily. So this gives us something of a string to feed along through all of it, because it's all about the cycles of the year, the cycles of our bodies, the cycles of our spirit. When we know that autumn time is coming and we're harvesting the rest of what we can so we can make it through the winter, spiritually and sustenance wise, even though, we have grocery stores we can go to now and stuff, but spiritually, that's why I always start my shadow work after Mabon around Samhain time, because it's that cycle of inner workings. Everything is quiet now. Now is the time to really look at yourself, your inner soul work, and prepare it for the new birth, for new life. When Ostara comes in the springtime and we see the very beginnings of spring to burst forth onto the planet again. And now we've made our inner changes. We've looked at ourselves in the mirror. We've done the shadow work we need to do. And we're ready to come out into the world again to say, I'm here and I'm ready and I'm following this cycle. And the earth is telling me by the cycles that we're going through that I'm on the right track, that I'm going through this correctly. To me, it's extremely gratifying and exciting. I love it. So there are so many different, every different pantheon has their own god and goddess attached to this holiday. There are tons of different stories depending on which pantheon you follow. The name Mabon itself came from a Celtic story. The Celtic story was about Mabon, and he, actually I don't think this is the one, he was the son, the young divine they call him, of, where am I? Not John Barleycorn, although we're going to go through that because that has something to do with this. It must have been this one. Oh, it was this one. Sorry guys, I apologize. I've been working on these for days and days. Okay, I was right on it. Gosh. Okay, it's a Welsh legend, Celtic. He's the child of light, the son of the earth mother goddess Modron, kind of, sometimes there's an R in there. In this tradition, in this story, his mother Modron grieves. She suddenly starts to grieve because her son Mabon is taken from her when he's 3 days old. And he's imprisoned in a stone wall. And he stays there, although he's not very unhappy apparently. He kind of, has friends that visit him and stuff. But his friends come and he wins his release by, his friends have to say, we want to release him so he can help us, because it's kind of an odd story, but what's the name of it? Kilwich, the companions of Kilwich, a young suitor who is seeking the hand of a maiden named Olwen. These companions are helping Kilwich to accomplish the many formidable tasks set for him by Olwen's father. So he's going to the father to say, I want to marry Olwen. King Yspadaden, a giant chieftain. Yspadaden's life was predicted to end when his daughter got married. And so he keeps saying, nope, there's this huge thing that you can't possibly solve. The particular problem was that he couldn't get married at all except for to Olwen. Oh, so Kilwich could not get married at all unless it was to Olwen. So he's like, okay, look, this is the only choice I got. You know, gods make up weird rules too. So we can understand Mabon's disappearance and imprisonment, which loosely parallels other cultures' myths to explain winter in terms of grief and loss. Perhaps the Child of Light's removal from his mother's joy symbolized a terrible crime against the earth, or the goddess, or motherhood in general, which was punished by months of unproductive cold and darkness. So the one that I always learned before I learned the story of Mabon, and sometimes I have to say, because the Mabon is that ancient Welsh storybook, basically, that has all the Welsh stories in it. And I highly recommend you get a copy because a lot of pagan tradition comes from this book. But when you get that copy, you kind of have to there's other stuff to get with it to kind of understand it, because there's a lot of weird things in there that you're like, what? How did this? I don't understand how this goes. But when I learned about Persephone and Demeter. Demeter was Persephone's mother. And Hades comes from the underworld and sees Persephone and falls in love with her and talks her into coming down, or kidnaps her, depends on which story you're reading, brings her down to the underworld, and the earth begins to die because Demeter, who is like Mother Gaia, right, Mother Earth, starts to let everything die because she is weeping and she's not paying attention to what's growing, and so everything starts to die until they finally figure out Demeter is down in the underworld with Hades, and now they've gotten married. And Persephone doesn't really mind it so much. She kind of likes it down there, and she's falling in love with Hades, and she's like, it's not really so bad. But Demeter is just outpouring of grief from a mother. She's lost her daughter. Sounds kind of similar, right? Lost a son, lost a daughter. And so she's weeping and she's not paying attention. And finally, Persephone's husband, which is... come on, which is... Demeter is the daughter of Rhea and Cronus. Rulership was stolen from Zeus. The husband, I swear it was Zeus, but I might be wrong. Anyways, says, okay, we need Demeter to cut the shit out. I'm sick of listening to her. So they make a deal. And so for half the year, Persephone is allowed to come back up top to visit with her mother and her father and all that, and that's when Demeter is able to focus on the spring and regrowth and all that stuff. So in the spring, things start to come back, and then when it's time for Demeter to go back to the underworld to be with her husband, everything starts to die again. And so that's the story that I learned about Mabon. But I did not realize until I started reading this book, which is another great one. This is Mabon, Celebrating the Autumn Equinox. This is by Kristen Madden. Good book. That there are so many other stories. Pomona, to the ancient Romans, Pomona was the much beloved goddess of fruit trees. That's where we get the palm for apple. And there's a similar kind of story there. Venus, Dionysus and Bacchus, that's a very similar story. In truth, Dionysus is the earlier form of Bacchus, although some historians feel that Bacchus is the Roman perversion of the god Dionysus. It was Dionysus who showed mortals to cultivate grapevines and make wine. As a god of vegetation, Dionysus died each winter and was reborn each spring. It was through his yearly seasonal rites that the Greek dramas evolved. Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus wrote their Greek tragedies for this most important festival, the Great Dionysia, held in Athens for 5 days each spring. So then Adonis, there's Egyptian lore, Hathor and Osiris and Isis. Middle East, Archangel Michael has a lore that has to do with this season. The Sumerians have Dumuzi, Inanna. The Babylonians, Tammuz, Ishtar, Siduri. Then the Phoenicians, Adon, Astoreth. So you can see the Norse have Freya, Freyr, and Thor is also associated with that. Thor was, it's not an aspect that he's well known for, but he was known as a god of the harvest, because when lightning and thunder happen, so does the rain, and it takes care of the crops. The Celts had Modron, and Cernunnos is a big part of this holiday. The Green Man, a big part of this holiday. So there's all kinds of stories that you can go by. I would pick one and kind of stick with it, or do one a year. I've done Persephone and Demeter for lots of years because that's one I knew about. I had kind of heard Mabon, but I still want to look into it. I have my Mabignon out. I'm going to try to read and figure out why he's in this wall and how he gets out exactly. I know it has something to do with his friends and all that, but so what does this have to do with Mabon, guys? Okay, biggest thing is it's the harvest season. We are harvesting, celebrating what we have grown all the warm season, and packing it away for the winter and getting ready for that dark half of the year. So it's celebrating the turning of the wheel of the year, like all of our holidays. This one to me is very spiritual because it's the death, it's the turning under. It's the disappearance of the God, which we know he's not really disappeared. He's just kind of in there doing what he has to do. We just don't see him very much until Yule, when he's reborn. At Samhain, the goddess becomes pregnant, and so he is there in spirit. We still don't see him a whole lot. Okay, so what are some of the symbols we can have? Acorns. Acorns is one of the biggest symbols of Mabon. I have acorns all over my altar. I always have the horned god, and I always have bowls of acorns all over the place. Oh, and there's a story there too. Acorns are at the top of our list. As perfectly as eggs symbolize those stars, acorns represent Mabon. They're the fruit of the oak, and so part of the harvest. They're also the seed and the promise of rebirth. Like every fruit, they represent the death of a flower. And as we've seen, flowers are vibrant symbols of vigorous life. And like every fruit, acorns contain the seed of the next generation, fulfilling the goddess's promise and the god's destiny of rebirth. Love it. So right in this little thing is the promise of rebirth. The promise of spring is coming. Antlers and horns. Gotta love our antlers and horns. So this is, hoof and horn, hoof and horn. If you don't know it, look that song up. That's a good one for this time of year. Cornucopias, dry leaves. Now around here, our leaves haven't really changed by Mabon yet. A little bit. They're starting to turn yellowish, but not like that we want them to. Gourds, grapes, rattles. So if you have dried squash and gourds from last year that rattle, I pull mine out. The harvest theme. So corn. I always get out my little popcorn corns. Corn stalks. I have to go up the road and get my corn stalks. I have big corn stalks that I like to put around. There's all kinds of stuff we can do. Now tomorrow, I'm not going to be at my main office. I was going to print out the rituals. There's so many rituals, guys. I'm going to pick out probably 2, and we'll talk about them and how to do them. Tomorrow, I don't get back here until late. Hopefully, if it's not raining, I will try to do the Mabon ritual and give you some ideas for ritual of exactly what you can do. But keep in mind, your symbols should be antlers and horns, acorns, harvest. So you want fruits and vegetables on your table. You want stuff that is natural to where you live. So oak leaves, we have tons of maples, so I'll be pulling maple leaves, and horns and corn and, oh, apples. Duh, how can I forget? Mabon to me is apple. Apple, apple, apple. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, and I was going to have a crab apple here, but I will show you tomorrow. If you cut an apple in half, not from the top down, but right through the middle, in it, there's got to be a picture of it in one of these books, in that apple, I can't believe there's not a picture of it, is a pentacle made from the seeds, which is like my favorite symbol of Mabon. When I definitely include that in every single Mabon ritual I do at some point, is cutting that seed, or cutting that apple, and looking at the two halves form the pentacle. Cannot believe not one of these has this symbol. Are you kidding? This is crazy. The other thing is John Barleycorn. John Barleycorn is a great story. I only have 4 minutes. All right, I'll try to do this quick. Look up John Barleycorn. There's several people. I think Damn the Bard does a song version of it. There's several song versions. And it sounds really nasty and violent, but keep in mind that John Barleycorn is the harvest, is the wheat, okay? There was 3 kings into the east, 3 kings both great and high, and they have sworn a solemn oath, John Barleycorn should die. They took a plow and plowed him down, put clods upon his head, and they have sworn a solemn oath, John Barleycorn was dead. But the cheerful spring came kindly on, and showers began to fall. John Barleycorn got up again, and sore surprised them all. So in the spring he starts growing. The sultry suns of summer came, and he grew thick and strong, his head well armed with pointed spears, that no one should him wrong. The corn? Come on, are you kidding me? The sober autumn entered mild, when he grew wan and pale. His bending joints and drooping head showed he'd begun to fail. No, I do not want mosquito bites on my face. His color sickened more and more. He faded into age, and then his enemies began to show their deadly rage. They've taken a weapon long and sharp and cut him by the knee, then tied him fast upon a cart like a rogue for forgery. They laid him down upon his back and cudgeled him full sore. They hung him up before the storm and turned him over and over. They filled up a darksome pit with water to the brim. They heaved John Barleycorn there to let him sink or swim. They put the corn in the water to cook it. They laid him out upon the floor to work him further woe, and still as signs of life appeared, they tossed him to and fro. They wasted o'er a scorching flame the marrow of his bones, but a miller used him worst of all, for he'd crushed him between 2 stones. So the mill crushed him into cornmeal. And they have taken his very heart's blood and drank it round and round. And still the more and more they drank, their joy did more abound. So now they've made him into, what? Mead. John Barleycorn was a hero bold of noble enterprise, for if you do but taste his blood, 'twill make your courage rise. 'Twill make a man forget his woe, 'twill heighten all his joy, 'twill make the widow's heart to sing, though the tear were in her eye. Then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man a glass in hand, and may his great prosperity never fail in old Scotland. Love it. So go look up John Barleycorn. It's a great story to read around Mabon time, and try to find some mead. Yay! Blessings. I'm going to try to do a duck unboxing tonight too. So we'll see. It's taken me 3 hours to upload a 30-minute video though. So we'll see, guys. Love you. Blessings.